What we're going to do in this video is create an entire project start to finish using Mograph, Redshift to create a relatively simple animated background. So let's go ahead and get started. We will start by creating an inside spline shape with a radius of 200 centimeters. So really that's 400 centimeters all the way across. With our inside selected, we can hold down Alt or Option and create a cloner. That will make sure the inside is a child of the cloner. We don't have to do that ourselves. You can see right now we're getting a grid pattern, 3 on the X, 3 on the Z. And we can switch the mode here to honeycomb to get this really nice pattern. You can adjust the orientation of the pattern, though you will also need to adjust the orientation of your inside. You can adjust the offset, though this does work pretty much without us having to do anything. You can adjust the width, the height, as well as the spacing. And if you're a bit unsure how the spacing kind of correlates to our inside here, let's take a look really quickly using our measure tool. I do have snap turned on, so let's just actually click on the measure tool, click new measure, and then just move it around. So we can see how this is, the height is actually 346 point whatever. That's what the height here is. Now, without the offset, you can see each one of these overlaps. And so that's where really that 300 comes in. So if we just kind of snap one point there to there, you can see that's 300. And that's why our width is 300 there. So if you're looking to make adjustments, that's kind of how all that plays into it. Even though if we're just using our default inside, that's not necessary. So let's set that back to the default by right clicking on it. And then you can adjust the form, which is kind of the shape here. So if you want a circle, you can do that. Now, if the width and height aren't set accordingly, you could end up with an oval there. So just keep that in mind, but you can end up with a little bit more of a round shape here. You could also use a spline if you drag a spline in there to help create the shape. So I think we're going to want square since that's what we have. And now what we can do is place our inside of an extrude. And so I'm going to use that same kind of technique. I'm going to make sure the inside is selected. I'm going to hold down Alt or Option and then find my extrude. And so when we do that, this is what we get, our extruded inside. And you can see there's no gap here. You can see the lines. I don't know how well that's coming through in the recording, but they are being drawn. Even though if we were to turn on our display mode with lines, we would see that there actually is no gap there. Here in the extrude, we can have some fun with this and really spending some time in the caps section here to add some detail, break up how flat the surface is before we even get to, say, the random effector and start animating it. And what we're going to do is just click on Load Preset. And you can see we have a bunch of different options here. I'm going to go with shifted bevel. I actually don't know why I favorited that one, but it is one of my favorites. So when we apply that now, we can take a look at it and see what it's doing. Now it's a bit strange to me why I'm not seeing it at the moment, but if we turn down the size, right, we do begin to see it. And I think it's because they were perfectly overlapping that we weren't actually seeing it. Although, yeah, if we set that back to 5, there we go. We can see that, and it's actually pretty small there. So, okay, that seems to be working now. Not sure why it wasn't previously. But from here, we can adjust the size. And I actually do want the size to be a little bit larger. It does give us a little bit of separation. It is making these quite thicker than I would like. And that's where we can go into the Object tab and adjust the offset here. Back in our extrude, back in the cap section, another way to adjust the thickness of the extrude is to adjust the tension. You can see how that makes it kind of larger or smaller there. So however large you want that, maybe something like 50% works pretty good. I'm going to turn off the lines now. And so that's actually looking pretty good. Now really what these presets do is use our spline curve here. And so you can make adjustments to the profile as you want. So you could come in here and make an adjustment to your handle or the points, and you'll notice how that's affecting my shape here. A couple other things you can do if you select all the points is if you right click, and this may be a bit cut off. Actually, it is cut off, but You can flip horizontal and flip random, and that's towards the bottom. And so flipping horizontal will make these kind of go in instead of out. Whereas if you flip vertical, kind of does something similar. You can once again kind of see the profile, how now it's going in as it gets closer to the middle, right? I do think I'll leave it pretty much as is. And with that, we are done with the modeling portion of this. Okay, so let's make sure we have the cloner selected. And what we can do is decide whether we want to add a random effector or a plane effector. Both can end up working. The random has the randomness built in. The plane effector means we're going to need to use something like the random field. And you may be asking yourself, why the random field versus the random effector? Well, fields can be used in other places, vertex maps, things like that, certain deformers, whereas effectors really only work on Mograph objects. Another reason why I like the random field versus the random effector, and I've said this in several of my videos, is that we do have the ability to make it loop. So that's why I'll be relying on the random field and using the plane effector here. So I'm going to make sure I have my cloner selected, come here to my effectors, make sure I choose plane. That will automatically apply it. We did see it shift up a bit. And if you check your cloner in the effectors tab, you should see the plane effector listed there. And if you don't, you can just drag it on in. Now what we can do with our plane effector is it has a default value on the y-axis. So we're going to zero that out. And we will come back to the z-axis and type in something like 300 centimeters because that's the axis where we want this movement to happen on. We can now go to the fields, and this is where we can create our random field. And you might see linear field listed since that's kind of the default one. But if you left click and hold on your field objects, you can then find random field. And we can see that's doing a great job randomizing this. Now, I did kind of come back in here in the extrude and increase the offset amount so that we don't see as many gaps in here, right? These gaps aren't necessarily a problem, but if you don't want to kind of see past our background that we're creating, this hexagon background, then making sure our offset is large enough to minimize that or get rid of it completely while allowing these to move back and forth is a very easy way to fix that. So in our random field, now we can come in and increase our animation speed. All right, we can see things moving back and forth. Great. Can decide how fast you want that. And then for the loop period, I could type in 90 frames since that's kind of what we're seeing here. And that takes care of that. Now scale is important. I don't think you notice it quite as much in the random field as you do the random effector. It could be due to the space we're working in here. But typically what you'll see is with larger scales, you get a lot smoother of a result where the difference, the movement between one clone to the next isn't as different as it is with a smaller random field. All right, and so that's a little bit closer to what I was expecting. But honestly, I wonder if we could go higher. We'd get something, there we go, smoother. So something like that, right? Where the difference in movement is not very much versus the default where, you know, they're doing very different things, almost the opposite things, okay? And that's due to the size of the noise pattern. You also have different noise, types in here. Though I don't know how well you'll see these, especially with kind of the default scale value. If you used a really large scale value like I had, then it's possible those might start to show through. But, you know, this is looking pretty good. Either gaseous, Perlin, or really whatever else you would like to see. And so with this, we can now move on to the lighting and materials portion. We're going to keep this simple by using things from the asset browser, a couple of materials, carbon fiber and metal, but let's start with the HDRI. So we're going to create a dome light because that's where we load an HDRI. And then I'll search for it. And I want to make sure I'm searching either in all or auto. I do have Grayscale Gorilla Plus, so you might see a few more in here than what you have. And let's see, I think Studio 14 will work well. So we can go ahead and start our IPR to get a sense of what that looks like. Now, without any materials on our geometry, it's going to be a bit hard to tell what our reflections will look like. So let's start adding some materials. We can start by searching for metal and actually maybe just switch to materials here to help simplify things a bit. I think this aluminum will look pretty good. So I'll apply that to my extrude. And honestly, not too bad there to orbit around, make sure it looks reflective and exactly the way I want. Can work with that. Now, carbon fiber. I'm going to use this second one. I think the pattern looks a little bit better. And yeah, that looks pretty good, but you'll notice we can see this reflection very, very strongly. We can fix that. Before we do, we can decide where we want the carbon fiber and where we want the metal. Our extrude does have some built-in selections. You can see these here. You can enable them if you want to use those selection tags. However, all you really have to do is just type in those selection names into the selection field of your texture tag, material tag. So I can do something like C1, which is the front cap, or R1, which is the bevel. So I think I like it better on the front cap. We'll do something like that. And I wish the pattern was maybe a touch smaller. So why don't we just increase the tiles to 2. All right, now to get rid of that reflection or roughen it up a bit, this is a substance material. So there's really kind of 2 places you want to keep an eye on. In some substance materials, you might be able to adjust the roughness. Okay, and that would work except for that this also has a coat. So this roughness is really for the kind of like the carbon fiber weave or pattern itself, where the coat is what is on top. So if we just add a bit of roughness to this, we'll start to see that kind of soften up a little bit. All right, so maybe we do something like 0.15. So it just kind of softens it up a little bit. All right, and the reflection is pretty repetitive, but I think we'll be able to get away with that here. The random, maybe we could push that a little bit more to help with this. Eventually adding in a camera could help with that as well. Perhaps we'll get some depth of field and some other things going on. But for the base materials, that's going to do it. And now what we're going to do is come back and add another material that will work with our Mograph color. For this next material, it is a bit involved. The first thing we want to do is toggle off our materials. So I had already done that, but just to go over it again, you can toggle them off so that way we can see our object or Mograph colors that are coming through here. And because we're primarily working with the field to drive this animation, that's where I'm going to work with the color. And you do that in the field list of your effector. Notice how we have an option here to turn on color. And if all we wanted to do is use the random color here, what we can do is create a new material, open it up in our node editor, which I will dock, and then turn off that pane there. And then all we would do, search for our color user data node, connect that to whatever properties you want. Okay, and then tell it where it's going to get that color from in the attribute name here. Now for presets, or I should say we want to go to the presets because that's where the most common ones are found. Now this is going to be a bit cut off, I do apologize, but if you go to Mograph, you will then see color. Under objects, you will also see things like object color and display color. So that's another way you could use those colors in a material. But yeah, we want Mograph color. And so once I've done that and then apply this material to our extrude, you can now see those colors are coming through in the material itself. And so you could connect this color user data to any property you wanted to contribute this color, whether it's transmission color, subsurface, emission, you name it. Okay. There's still a bit more you can do though. So for instance, in the random field itself, you do have this color shift option, which allows you to kind of push the variation a little bit, right? You can see at 0, pretty much no color, but as you start to increase it, you do get a little bit more. And you can also decide whether or not you want the alpha to be affected by the strength. So how much it's being applied based on if the effector is being applied by our field. So that's why it's brighter as it's getting pushed back, right? Those are the ones that have the effector applied. Now, what you can also do is go to the color remap section, because that's still not a really great way to control and be very specific with the colors you want. So in the color remap section, you could just choose color, and that will allow you to decide on a specific color. Notice once again how you're seeing variation here based on the strength of this field and how the effector is being applied. Okay, and you can take that a step further by working with a gradient. Now, what that will do is allow you to control, what those values are with it, the field being applied versus it not. White is going to be 100% in this case. Black is 0. And you can see I really kind of need to bring these in order to see those values a little bit more. And I can turn off my render view here because this will animate as this plays and these values change. Okay, and depending on the noise mode you're using, that's going to affect what you would need to do with these gradient knots here, right? So if I go back to my field tab, switch the noise here to say cell, notice how we get a very different distribution of those black and white values versus electric versus what we had previously in Berlin. So that's just something to kind of consider, right? And so, if you do want those range of values, you can work with your knots as much or as little as you need to in order to get the values you want. This is also a place where you can add your own colors, right? Now, if you add your own colors, you're going to want to add them kind of in between these two things, the two knots here, right? So if I just choose a preset like full colors, you're not going to see all of the colors because we're really only seeing the ones that kind of fit in the two knots we had for the black and white. So what you need to do is select all these knots, which I'm doing by holding shift. If anybody knows a quicker way of doing this, please let me know because it can be quite painful. It's not something I do all that often. And then what we have to do is try to fit this in to that area we had before. And I don't recall exactly what it was. That's looking pretty good to me, right? So that can be a way to get the exact colors you want, whether you load in a preset or make your own gradient. That will allow you to get the colors just as you would like them. But what you can do with this black and white gradient is you can use it to control the strength of different properties. Now, sometimes that can work in the weight property itself, like reflection and transmission. Unfortunately, that won't work in a property like emission weight. I don't know why. If anybody does, please let me know. But if you connect this to emission weight, you kind of get an error saying, it's not going to work. And I guess it's saying this needs a constant value, all right, as opposed to, I guess, one that maybe changes. I don't know. We definitely have a workaround though, so I'm not terribly concerned. Okay, so what we'll do is come over here to our nodes, and there's a few different ways you could do this, but we'll just use our color layer, which would allow us to choose a base color. So this could be whatever color you wanted your emission to be. So maybe we just go with a blue. Okay, I'm going to connect my color user data as color 1. And in the attributes here, we can decide what we want the blend mode to be. You could probably use the same color user data as the mask as well, but all we have to do is set this to multiply, right? Because if you multiply black on top of a color, you're going to get black versus the white where the color will still pass through. And so now what we can do is connect this to say base color as well as our emission color. And let's make sure our emission weight is something like 2. And so now when we turn this on, we're going to see where we have our emission being applied and how there are some areas where we have more emission if our effector and field are being applied more, or we'll have less emission if we don't have that a lot of strength from our plane effector and random field being applied. Once again, can come back into our gradient, and if you're seeing a bit too much of one thing or another, you can kind of change that. Another thing you could do is just invert the gradient itself. So that way it'd be kind of the opposite, so that it's the hexagons that are being pulled towards us, or more towards us, I should say, that have emission turned on versus the ones that are being pushed back. So that's how we can use color user data. 1, to add color, 2, to control the strength of properties, whether it is, roughness or even emission. Now to just finish this off with our material that we just created using our color user data node, I don't want it to be on everything. So I will type in capital R1 so it is on the rounding. And I wish there was maybe a little bit more variation. It seems like we still see a lot of emission here. So maybe we come back into the random field and drag that up so we don't see quite as much on, right? Now we're starting to see a little bit more where, or quite a few more of these where it's off. Man, that's a bit too much, but hopefully you get the idea. Definitely something you can adjust yourself. And I'm going to come back into my material here and I'm going to increase the emission weight. That is going to give me a little bit more control here once we decide to add, say, some bloom. So we're going to create a camera. Look through that. Going to go into the optical tab here to perhaps set up some depth of field and make sure I turn bokeh on. I'm going to eyedrop my focus distance. Maybe we'll do that kind of foreground and then lower the aperture until you get the amount of blur you want. And this is really based on your scene scale. So if things are a realistic size, then realistic values can work. If you do just want to kind of push this just to get some really shallow depth of field, then by all means use whatever values give you the result you want. So that's some really shallow depth of field. Maybe I do want it to be like in the middle. That's in focus. Okay. And then to add some glow to this, we can come in here to lens effects and use blue. Now I'm going to turn on override to actually use it. And we're going to adjust this threshold. And this threshold kind of matches the brightness of the pixels. And so that's why we turned up the emission so that we didn't have to turn this all the way down. Because as you'll see, it's starting to pick up not just the areas in our material where emissions turn on, but also these super bright reflections. Okay. So while that's kind of nice, it also just makes things a little bit muddy. And so ideally what we want to do is find a threshold where we can have it applied just to the blue values there. So maybe if I come back here and increase this even more, the emission, maybe to something like 40. Okay. You can see we're getting more bloom. And then we can just increase this threshold to turn it down. And now we're seeing it hopefully on more of the actual blue values and not the reflections itself. And I think that's a great place to leave this project. So that will do it for this one. If there's anything else you would like to see, please leave me a comment down below. And if you found this video helpful, I'd appreciate it if you could like it and subscribe to my channel. Until next time, take care.